I'm now pleased to yield to the chairman of the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Human Rights, Mr. Smith of New Jersey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think, again, working together, the two subcommittees, I think, sends a very clear and powerful message on issues, particularly as it relates to human rights in Iran. So, again, it's great to work with you and your subcommittee. Madam Chair, at the end of this month will mark 2 years since Pastor Saeed Abedini has seen or hugged his wife, Naghmeh, and his children, Rebecca and Jacob. What started out as a meaningful humanitarian trip to build an orphanage for children suffering in Iran tragically left Pastor Saeed's young children fatherless for the last few years. Pastor Saeed has been arrested in Iran before, and he had been, but he was released and told he could enter and exit the country for humanitarian work if he agreed to cease pastoring house churches. As Pastor Saeed's wife, Naghmeh, testified before our two subcommittees in December, Pastor Saeed accepted the Iranian requirement and turned to building an orphanage instead, but Iran did not uphold its end of the agreement. Pastor Saeed was arrested in September of 2012 and remanded to a prison notorious for housing Iran's worst criminals. He was denied contact with his attorney until just before the trial. The trial was a sham. It was not public. He and his attorney were barred from participating in key portions of the trial, following which a judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison, supposedly undermining the security of Iran. I mean, what a cruel joke that is, by sharing his faith and or practicing Christianity. A lot of the details are unclear, and discussion is very difficult as the Iranian government has denied Pastor Saeed Abedini's own lawyers access to the judicial decisions. He has suffered periods of solitary confinement, beatings, internal bleeding, death threats, and continued psychological torture during his 630 days in captivity. Although Pastor Saeed was finally permitted to be examined this winter by a private physician in Tehran who determined he needed surgery for internal injuries, he was denied any necessary treatment. Instead, on May 20th, just a few weeks ago, Pastor Saeed was brutally beaten at the hospital in front of his Iranian family and then returned to prison. Unfortunately, Pastor Saeed isn't the only American held under questionable and under dire circumstances by the Iranian government. Amir Mizeri Hekmati is a 31-year-old former Marine who disappeared while visiting his family in Iran in 2011. He was subsequently tried and sentenced to death on charges of cooperating with an enemy state and accused of moharibah, or enmity to God. He has also been accused of being a CIA agent. Mr. Hekmati has been an Iranian prisoner for more than 1,000 days on these trumped-up charges. Meanwhile, his father is dying of brain cancer and may never see his son again in life. The Iranian government is also believed to have imprisoned retired federal FBI agent Robert Levinson. Mr. Levinson traveled to Dubai to Iran's Kish Island and hasn't been seen since. In March 2011, the administration announced there were indications that Mr. Levinson was being held somewhere in Southeast Asia, but the Iranian government has not lived up to its promise to fully investigate his disappearance. He has now been in captivity for nearly 2,500 days. The false imprisonment of American citizens did not change under President Rouhani. And one excuse proffered is that somehow the Iranian legal system is organized differently than the American legal system. Of course, we believe that the President has huge power. That said, we know that in the United States, the executive branch investigates, prosecutes, and imprisons those convicted of crimes, and the role of the judiciary is limited to the trial of cases and the hearing of appeals. In Iran, the judicial branch investigates and prosecutes alleged crimes. The judiciary tries the cases, executes the sentences, supervises the prisons, and runs programs that purportedly rehab prisoners. The Chief Justice is also the official to whom requests for pardons are initially addressed, for it is he who bears the responsibility of making recommendations to the Supreme Leader for, quote, pardoning or reducing the sentences of convicts within the framework of Islamic criteria. I therefore respectfully call on the Chief Justice. We've called on the President many times, the Foreign Minister. Many of us have conveyed strong views directly to him, but now we call on the Chief Justice to help resolve these cases that have become such a sore point between the United States and Iran. And specifically, I ask that the Chief Justice visit or appoint a personal representative to visit Pastor Abedini, Mr. Hekmati, and Mr. Levinson in the prisons where they are held. The Chief Justice review the integrity of their trial processes and instruct the Prosecutor General to release for public review the full trial and appeal records, including the evidence on which the court relied for each of their cases. The Chief Justice is also asked to permit representatives of the Swiss ambassador in Tehran, Giulio Haas, to visit with each of these prisoners and to report back to his government and to ours on the state of their health and the conditions of their imprisonment. My reading of Article 156 of the Iranian Constitution is that it is the judiciary's role to serve as the protector of the rights of individuals and society. Call on the Chief Justice to implement that. Ironically, Iran wants the world to lift sanctions and trust them with nuclear capabilities despite continued and violent disregard for fundamental human rights, not just for Americans, but for countless other people, especially indigenous Iranians. Pastor Saeed, Mr. Hekmati, and Mr. Levinson are American citizens, but they have not had their freedom. The UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Iran, Dr. Ahmed Shahid, warned in March 2014, just a few months ago, that hundreds of individuals reportedly remain in some form of confinement for exercising their fundamental rights, including 179 Baha'i, 98 Sunni Muslims, 48 Christians, and 14 Dervish Muslims. Let me just note in final, while I'm grateful that the President raised the case of Pastor Saeed in his call to President Rouhani last September, the United States can and do much more to secure his release and that of the other two Americans. Nakmeh Abedini testified before our committee, you'll recall, Madam Chair, in December, and she said, "While I am grateful," there's a quote, "for President Obama's willingness to express concern about my husband and other imprisoned Americans in Iran during his recent phone conversation with Iran's new president, Rouhani, I was devastated to learn that the administration didn't even ask for my husband's release when seated directly across the table from the leaders of the government that holds him captive." She said that right there, sitting at that witness table. She went on to say, "My husband is suffering because he is a Christian. He is suffering because he's an American. Yet his own government, at least the executive and diplomatic representatives, have abandoned him," according to Nakmeh. Don't we owe it to him as a nation to stand up for his human rights and for his freedom? We need to redouble our efforts. And again, with the deadline coming up for the July 20th, we have a window of opportunity that cannot be squandered. Yield back.